Good day and welcome to my channel. My name is Rhod Mackenzie and today I want to talk about the ongoing problems posed by countries that have embraced Russophobia and imposed sanctions that have been detrimental to their own economic interests. I'm talking today about Finland, Poland and Romania, who experienced the fastest rate of debt accumulation in the European Union. So what are the reasons behind this, and is this the price they have to pay for their Russophobia as their economies collapse? Now let's look at the debt trap. A Eurostat report has highlighted that Finland's public debt has grown by almost 8 percentage points. Poland's up 6 and Romania's up 5.8, and that's just in the last year. Only a year ago, Bulgaria was amongst the EU countries with the lowest level of indebtedness at 22% of its GDP. Now its current figure's gone up now and it stands at 26.3, plus the main increase occurred between April and June of this year. Now let's look at the overall picture. In the EU, Greece is the notable leader in this regard, with its debt standing at 150% of GDP, Italy at 138% and France at 115%. Belgium and Spain are also in the top 5 countries with more debt than their GDP. Now in the EU as a whole, the figure stands at 82%, and within the Eurozone the figure's at 88.2%. Now let's look ahead of the curve. It's always been evident that the so-called high-income countries have consistently exhibited a higher level of public debt relative to their GDP compared to lower-income countries. Further analysis reveals even more noteworthy statistics where the per capita debt burden is considered. In the so-called ostensibly prosperous countries of Belgium, Italy, France, Germany and Austria, for example, the debt figure exceeds €40,000 per capita. Now before I continue, many of you watching this video are not subscribers to my channel, so if you've enjoyed this video then please hit the subscribe button. Also hit on the alert bell so you get notified when I post a new video. Plus, if you want to support me, you can make a donation by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom right hand side of the screen, or by clicking on the Buy Me a Coffee link below in the credits. Now on Tuesday 4th of November, I'm going to be doing a live stream. It'll be at 4:45 London time, 12:45 New York time and 6:45 Central European time. So do join me to ask questions and participate in our movement. Now the rationale behind this is quite straightforward. These countries have been able to borrow heavily for an extended period because this strategy is enabled by their high credit ratings and the confidence of their lenders. Now the funds that they raise are used to maintain their allegedly already highly achieved prosperity. However, the current debt is growing, the fastest among the so-called poorest countries, who actually need to catch up with the richest but lack the sufficient resources to be able to do so. So they have to borrow at different interest rates due to their lower creditworthiness, and the credit ratings hurt them even more. Now Finland, Poland and Romania are not exactly wealthy countries, but none of them are actually poor either. Each of these countries has faced a difficult time recently, leading to their current positions, which is based on their attitude and position towards Russia, and particularly the use of its energy resources via imports. Now, Finland's economy has reached a point of recession and stagnation. Its GDP has decreased by 0.4% in the second quarter this year compared to the first, and its growth is zero year on year. This is a country that previously enjoyed quite a high standard of living, but has now experienced a significant economic downturn due to the collapse of its key sectors of the economy, including forestry, tourism, construction, and exports of furniture and wood-based products. Now, this is almost completely due to the breakdown of its ties with Russia, which until recently supplied Helsinki with raw materials, bought its finished goods and ensured an uninterrupted export channel from the backwaters of Europe to the wider world. However, a combination of factors, including the introduction of sanctions on Russia and then cutting its economic ties with it and then closing the borders to Russians, then its accession to the EU, plus a commitment to increase its defence spending from 2.5% to 5% of GDP. Now that's a notable escalation in the Finnish position, which has hitherto been a peaceful and neutral country. Now the Finns' current objective to achieve the 5% spent on defence is going to bankrupt the place. Now the United States alliance, primarily as a sponsor, is insisting on this outcome. Donald Trump has emphasised that Washington is not obliged to provide security for Europe. I mean, who's that security from? I mean, that's what I won't get. Now, the Finnish media outlet Yle has noted the total budget for the projects this year is 44 billion. Now, in the light of Fitch's downgrade of Finland's rating this summer, the prospects of a return to low interest rates appears to be highly unlikely. I love that phrase. So economically, things are just going to get worse for the Finns. So is the cost of cutting ties with Russia. Now, let's look at the Polish economy, which is slightly different on its surface. It's actually performing quite well. GDP allegedly grew by 3.4% in the second quarter. But you've got to note that that's the growing level of government debt that's pushing that, and that's a significant concern. These changes are specific to the fiscal policy, where the budget is used as a tool to stimulate domestic demand, according to Svetlana Frumina, who's head of global markets at FinTech. Now, in essence, the country is increasing its borrowing to cover its rising expenses, usual sort of thing, overdrawn all the time. It spent huge amounts on its military, for example, by over 100% in the last 3 years. Now, the Poles are procuring planes, helicopters, armoured vehicles, air defence systems and ammunition from countries all across the globe. I mean, the country's industry's 5% GDP target has been fully achieved. I mean, defend against who? Now, on to Romania, which is a large budget deficit, 8.8% of its GDP, and that's serious. And Bucharest borrows in euros, so its debt interest payments are subject to the exchange rate fluctuations and the weakness of the Romanian currency, the euro. Plus, the ongoing standoff with Moscow in all European countries, either directly or indirectly, contributes to the growth of their national debt, because this is due to the fact that inevitably additional defence spending, the modernisation of the military infrastructure, the development of logistics corridors on NATO's eastern flank, and large-scale energy restriction are necessitated by the rejection of Russian resources. I mean, the military outspends are substantial. In March, the European Commission unveiled its Readiness 2030 strategy, which outlines plans to allocate military assistance to the Ukraine. Now, if the programme is adopted, it's going to result in an increased demand for further borrowing. Now, another significant expense, obviously, is energy. So important to note that oil and gas prices have increased significantly. Last summer, the US signed a trade deal with the European Union, committing Brussels to purchase $750 billion worth of their energy. Now, even a unified Europe lacks the necessary financial resources or the need to make such investments, and that's still going to necessitate a continued reliance on further borrowing. In the meantime, income growth has stagnated. Historically, the majority of the EU countries have been export-orientated, so they're particularly vulnerable to the impact of Trump's imposed tariffs and his ongoing trade protectionism. I mean, for example, Finland and Germany are no longer trading as well as they once did. Manufacturing is facing serious challenges, and due to the high cost of raw materials, companies are either being forced to either scale back their operations or relocate to other countries like the Far East or to America. Europeans are losing their jobs in the hundreds of thousands. Prices are rising. Budget revenues to the countries are declining. And according to Evgeny Smirnov at the International Economic Relations Company, this is going to continue. I mean, the energy crisis associated with the rejection of the cheap Russian energy resources, as well as the pandemic, was a significant shock to the European economy, and that's considerably impacted the lack of growth. And it's going to remain like that for quite a considerable time. Now, it's evident that those who allegedly had the greater financial resources don't have it anymore. Consequently, Europe has experienced a general decline in the real sector amidst its serious demographic crisis. The workforce is shrinking and the population is aging. Pension costs are increasing, plus funding is limited, and governments are experiencing continued increased budget deficits. And that approach is just not sustainable in the long term. I mean, many Eurozone countries are no longer able to maintain the 3% budget deficits that are allowed to by the European Commission's fiscal rules, and once again have to resort to borrowing more of their sovereign debt. I mean, the ongoing deindustrialization of the EU economy, particularly in Germany, with industrial enterprises leaving for the United States, is also limiting economic growth. You combine that with rising spending on defence, decarbonisation, healthcare and pension, the EU's fiscal space is continually getting limited. I say no longer the 3% deficit requirement So the debt burden shows no sign of declining while high interest rates remain, and that's going to continue, and that's necessary to combat inflation and continue the things. These factors limit economic growth and budget revenue growth. So it's anticipated that the EU public debt is going to rise from 82% to 132% over the next decade unless decisive action is taken at a pan-European level to implement structural economic reforms, fiscal consolidation and a closer integration of EU capital markets would enhance countries' access to financing. It means that all the banks do it together. Meanwhile, the total amount of public debt globally has reached 102 trillion. This is a serious risk to the global economic stability. Now, according to industry analysts, the debt tsunami will primarily impact the developing countries, and the richest are going to face the biggest challenge in repaying their debts. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hope to see you again on Tuesday. Thank you.